hello, and welcome to another episode of Gossip Finance, where I am your host, Alacia Singer.
And I'm Duncan Sandlin. How are you today, Lace?
Excellent. How are you doing?
Good. So we're gonna do something different today. Normally we do like the news, and then we do an educational segment, and then we do kind of our clips where we make jokes about people or criticize people at the end. But today we're gonna do something different. We had a YouTuber actually respond to one of our videos, and we really appreciate him. His name's Philip Aram. He wrote us, asked us. We said sure, great, go for it. He sent us the link. We watched it, and I wasn't initially. Lacey hasn't seen this yet, just FYI. But I watched it, and initially I was like, "Oh, we're not gonna bother responding." But then it got within a couple minutes, it got kind of wild, and so I thought, "Okay, I'll watch the rest of it." And so I watched the rest of it, and he kind of inadvertently brings up a lot of stuff that Lacey and I have complained about for months. We just never have enough time because we only have enough time for our schedules to do one 90-minute show a week. That's all we got because they take a lot of prep time too. It's not like, it takes at least 5 to 10 hours of research depending on the episode, right? So for us, it's kind of like, wow. And so he brought up a lot of stuff that we have all this extra research we never get in because we're trying to keep it tight. But he brought up this stuff. So I thought, well, we'll just go over his video today because he inadvertently steps into a bunch of this stuff. And so I thought that would be a fun thing to do. Um, he's a cool guy. He's a good guy. So we're not dogging on him. We might a little bit, but it's not because we think he's a bad person or anything. But we'll go through his video. And what he's doing is he's watching. So this is going to get a little meta. He's watching a video of ours where we're watching a Dave Ramsey video. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start, and then I'll sort of set it up. So this is Phil, and he's watching one of our videos.
Well, I know it's been a super long time. I haven't updated you about anything, but I came across this YouTube video, and I just have to share my thoughts and reactions to a couple of guys reacting to a TikTok. So let's just get into it.
So one more Ramsey one. Okay, so that was Phil. Let him introduce himself. So the video we're doing, the Ramsey Show, it's George Camel and Ken Coleman, or as we sometimes call them, Skippy and Fruity Doop. And they're watching a TikTok video where a guy's talking about living on $25 an hour. And then what he does is he puts in an average budget, the national average budget, right? And you can argue with his version of the budget up and down, whatever. But what he's talking about is really simple. He's talking about what's called a minimum budget, right? For an individual. And what a minimum budget basically is how much does a person need to make, right? Or what do they need for expenses in their budget in order to be able to survive and work, live and work? That's it. It doesn't usually cover medical costs or anything else. It's just, can you keep your workers alive? That's it. That goes into that budget. Now, Lacey's nodding her head because we've seen this before. If you've worked with finance and clients, this is pretty regular thing where you're looking at the minimum budget thing, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, what this guy has done, and we didn't get into, we wanted to, but it would have taken forever, is he's talking about a living wage, right? And the way a living wage is calculated, and we'll get more into that, is all these universities across hundreds of universities across the country, they'll break down areas of their state into regions, and they'll figure what's the average minimum budget that people need to survive in that region, right? And that'll be that for that region, the average minimum budget. And it could be different, right? And then what they figure is, okay, to meet that amount of money, how much do you need to be making a year before tax? That's what the living wage is. Now, in some areas, the living wage is $10 an hour. In some areas, it's 50, right? It's spread throughout the country. It depends on where you live, right? In New York, $15 an hour is not, you can't survive on $15 an hour working full time and live. But $15 an hour in, say, like a small town like Sandy, Oregon, it's probably plenty, right? So all this data gets compiled, and the university that handles all this is MIT in Texas, right? They have the big grant for this, and they've been doing this forever. I mean, for a long time. And what they do is they take all those together and they build basically what's called a living wage calculator. And it calculates the living wage. And so you type in a zip code and it'll tell you what the living wage is. And you type in the household size, 4 people, this is the living wage. 2 people, this is the living wage, right? It's great. Governments use it. That's how they figure out how to distribute resources like welfare, police, you know. Businesses use it to figure out, okay, do we want to build a factory there? Because if I'm building a factory and I can only pay the workers $20 an hour, I'm not going to build the factory in a town where the living wage is 25, because it's going to be hard to find workers. But if I find a town where the living wage is 15 and I'm offering $20 an hour, I'm never going to have a problem finding workers for my factory. It's also a good tool for, do I want to market to this area or not? So businesses use it to basically make decisions about how they want to save money or build things. So this is universally used, and it's MIT does it, and the federal government uses it, your state government, your local government, most businesses, and any academic who's studying employment and things like that. This is a universal thing. And the funny thing is the guy picks $25 an hour. And the reason he picks that is because it's 2 things. One, last year in 2022, $25.02 was the average living wage nationally. So the average of all those regions together, right? The entire United States, that was the living wage. You needed that much on average in the United States, right? That's all we're talking about. The thing we were focusing on this video is all we're talking about is this is an average need. It's all been baked into the cake. But then the guys on the Ramsey show don't understand that. They think he's talking about an actual budget, and they're criticizing him on saying, well, you just need to cut things out of your budget. When they don't realize, no, this is a national average, right? These things are baked in the cake. You can't really criticize them. This is determined that they need these things, right? So that was the whole gag behind the clip, but they don't get that. Now, Phil's going to watch it, and Phil's going to fall into the same trap they do, where he doesn't understand that either, right? And I don't think it's because he's stupid or anything. I think it's just because he doesn't know, just like them, right? But we'll get into this, and I'll get into this a little bit more detail. But that's kind of the concept of what's happening. Is we're just making fun of the fact that they don't even know what they're looking at, and they're giving financial advice on it. That was the whole joke of the clip. Now this one is I think this one's a fun one. So it's another TikTok guy, but he's talking on living on $25 an hour.
Now, let me set this up very briefly, and we're going to pause it a few times. So stay with us. This is a very popular and viral TikTok, and this is a real sentiment. I want you to understand something. We're not about to show you this and destroy and criticize and belittle.
FYI, this is Ken Coleman on the left, and this is George Camel on the right.
The sentiment. We will take issue with some things, factually, but understand, and I want to set this up properly. There are millions and millions of Americans, George, who feel the way that this gentleman feels. So take this with a shaker of salt and understand this is why we do what we do here at Ramsey Solutions. Let's roll the video.
If you're making less than $25 an hour right now, you should be terrified. If you are making less than 25, you're going to be very pissed off by the time we get to the end of this video.
Hey,
This
pause.
information here is going to scare you.
All right, pause. First of all, okay, what he just said there is not true. You'll be fine if you're making $25 an hour.
We don't go viral on TikTok without some fear mongering, Ken.
Boy.
Okay, just on record, right now I make $20 an hour at my day job. I have other sources of income. I'm doing perfectly fine. I'm still able to save money at the end of every month, so.
Well, okay, so great. I think that's great for Phil. But once again, Phil does not represent the average American. This is an average of Americans.
And also, if you're adding, and I have other sources of income, that also makes you not necessarily represent somebody that has that wage. Because when you're saying, this is what my hourly wage is, isn't that generally speaking kind of assuming that that is one's only job or only source of income? It doesn't assume this is my wage, but I have, this money that comes in from these other things.
Right.
Would kind of make your wage actually go higher, right? If you were going to like actually math it out.
Right. And the other problem I have with this is, and a lot of people do this, is they start arguing from their perspective. And it's like, okay, so you're arguing from your specific perspective for everybody else. There are times when you can do that. It's called inductive reasoning. You can do like, I could like, oh, well, my hair grows, so I assume every human's hair grows. Right. That's probably fairly true, unless somebody's bald or something, right? They have, what is that, alopecia or whatever it is. But if I sit there and go, well, look, I'm 6 foot tall, so I assume every human being is 6 foot tall. Now, it doesn't always work. You see what I'm saying? What we're talking about is what scientists actually do, which is what the living wage thing is, which is what we're talking about for figuring out the minimum, which is this is the average overall. And then we're looking at it also by regions when you small it out. But we're looking at that and going, okay, well, how does it compare to the average, right? So if it's $25 an hour is the average national living wage, and we're looking at a town where their regional living wage is 17, then they're below the national average. So that tells us something statistically, and it tells us something about where we should distribute welfare or not, right? Where we should distribute if they need more police, if there's a big unemployment problem, things like that. It's one tool in a bunch of tools to make decisions. That's all it is that he's talking about. But it does gauge the fact that and this is where I'm going to get in and tell you, this is where the gauge gets interesting about that when he points this out. But they're missing this point. So why does he pick $25 an hour? Because $25 an hour and an average working year is $50,000 a year.
Average income.
Median income. 52. So half of all Americans are making $52,000 or less. All right. It's actually 54,000 is the median. I was off on that. But what we're saying is half of working Americans are making less. They're making that amount or less, right? They're making the living wage or less, right? And when we go through this video, I say or less like 5 or 6 times because I want to clarify. That doesn't mean that half are making that amount of money. It means they're making that or less than that.
Right. It means they're not making more than that.
Right. Which means half the people are barely getting by or beneath barely getting by on an average national level. So just to help clarify this, he confused it. So people confuse this all the time, and I want to put a pin in it because this is important. Median versus average, just in general, but median wage versus average. He thought it was the average income. It's not. So the median income in the United States is $54,132. That's what it was, I think, last year, 2022. So that means the median means half the people make that amount or above, and half make that amount or less. Okay.
Right. The median is literally the number in the middle.
The middle, yes.
Right.
So
right.
Let's do a scenario. Lacey and I are a country. Lacey makes $100,000 a year. I make $1 a year. The median income is $1 because half of us make $1 or less, and the other half make $1 or more. Right? So that's the median income in our country is $1. Even though Lacey makes $100,000, I only make $1. The average is calculated by averaging our incomes together and then dividing it by the number of people. So in our case, it would be 101,000 is the total income for 2 people. We divide it by 2. So the average income in gossip finance land would be $50,000.50. Well, here's the thing. If you're sitting there going, well, look, there's 2 people there and 50,000, 50 cents is the average, they're probably doing okay. No, Lacey's doing okay. I'm flat on my ass. I only got $1 a year. That's why the median is important, because the gap between the median and the average tells you how tilted the things are to the top. right? So the average income in the United States, let me pull this back over, is $71,456. So it's tilted more towards the top, but I'll show you. So there are approximately 211 million workers here in the U.S. Whoops, sorry, I want to go back. 211 million workers in the U.S., according to the census.gov. This was 2022. So 105,000 of them, 105,500 are making this amount of 54,000 or less. Some are making that. Most of them are making less than that. I want to keep putting a pin in that. I thought I did it a bunch of times in this video, in the last video, but apparently this gets lost. So a lot of people are making less than the median. Okay? If you look at the average, 31.85%, so 32% make the average or more, and 68.15% make that or less. I actually think I had less, not more. Sorry, I screwed that up on that. But that means approximately 143 million Americans make less than the average. Okay? So there's a big, big difference there, right? 2/3 of the people in this country don't even make average income, which means that other third is making so much money they tilt the average up. Right? But now's where it gets really kind of funny. So I thought, good point. Look, we're looking at what minimum people need to survive, right? Kind of average minimum people need to survive. And I'm making the point that half the people aren't even meeting it or barely meeting it. So that signifies a serious problem that a lot of people in this country aren't even meeting a living wage. We're talking about 90 to 100 million people can't even meet basic standard of living on the living wage calculator, right? But Phil takes this in a completely different direction. And this is where we totally lose him. And you're going to love this, Lace. So if I just explained that. We'll go back 1 second. Working here is $50,000 a year.
Average income in America.
What, around 52? So half of all Americans are making 52,000 or less.
That is amazing. If you make $50,000 a year, you are in the top 10% of earners in the world. America is a very wealthy and privileged nation. Even the poorest among us live as kings compared to the rest of the world.
That was his takeaway.
I feel like he went somewhere totally different with this.
Well, yeah, but it's also, one, we're not talking about the rest of the world. We're talking about America. Two,
right, we weren't bringing that all into the comparison at all, actually.
Two,
so that goes to a different place for sure.
But two, here's the other thing that really kills me. So he's not wrong. I mean, developed countries, if you live in a developed country like Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, Canada, yeah, you have a higher standard of living, but also you need more money just to survive. If I'm living in Botswana, I probably don't have running water and electricity if I'm living in a village. And our currency is probably worthless anyway, so I'm probably just using a barter system anyway. I probably don't have any wealth because I'm living in a communal sort of system. But he's not wrong. So I looked it up: median versus average income. I'm sorry. This is the top 10% worldwide. Globally, if you have 138,000 or more net worth, you're in the top 10% of wealthy people in the world, right? In America, to be in the top 10%, you have to have a net worth of 185,000. But to be in the top 10% of earners in the United States, you need to be making 173,000. So you need to be making more than triple the median just to be in the top 10%.
So essentially, this is interesting and a little ironic, but there are a lot of Americans that, by American standards, aren't making it, but by global standards, they are in the top 10% of earners, because you go and start comparing comparing us to other countries that.
But it's apples and oranges comparison.
Right. Sure.
It doesn't mean anything. The other thing about it is it's kind of this, what he does, the we live like kings thing. It's like, okay, it's kind of like your mom telling you, finish your peas because they're starving kids in Africa, right? Well, shocker too, they're starving kids in the United States. Right now, the estimate is somewhere between 10 to 12 million children in the United States suffer from food insecurity. 10 to 12 million. You know how many people there are under the age of 18 in the United States? 70 million. So that means 1 in 6, roughly. 1 in 6 or 7 children in the United States. And you know what? Their parents are probably in that bottom part of the median, making less than the $25 an hour. But I mean, and I don't think Phil means it this way, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, I got it. Why don't we go to a homeless shelter and we'll talk to those people that are working and living in the shelter and making hardly making it up to survive and have to get on welfare. But Phil's got a message for all you guys.
Earners in the world.
See?
America is a very wealthy and privileged nation. Even the poorest among us live as kings compared to the rest of the world.
See, you live as kings here in this homeless shelter compared to other people. So just shut up. I know that's not what he means, but that's what it sounds like. I mean, you might as well buy a big bag of Carl's Jr.'s burgers and walk into the homeless shelter while you're eating them, not share them, and tell them, well, be grateful. You live like kings compared to other people. I mean, it kind of, it's once again, he's looking at it from his own perspective, and he's not thinking about the big picture.
Well, and the danger of looking at it from our own perspective, and it's in some respects difficult not to do because we are our own lens.
Right.
But one of the dangers is, okay, even take Phil's extra income off the table to the side and say he's making roughly $20 an hour and he's doing just fine.
Mm-hmm.
So when looking at this median number and you're saying, half of Americans are earning this amount or below, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at that, now I don't know Phil's family situation, but if that's a woman in her 40s with 3 kids who's single and maybe one of the kids is younger and in daycare and whatnot, and she is making that same $20 an hour,
right?
That's a scenario where you cannot possibly tell me she's not struggling there.
Absolutely, but that's my point. Is the joke of the whole original clip was we're talking about average. Ken and George think, oh, well, this is just a simple budget. We'll fix it. What they don't realize is what you're talking about is you're basically saying, oh, if you just like I think their answers are like pay off your car or, and I don't know with what money, get a roommate. It's like, you can't tell that to 90 to 100 million people. Oh, if you just pay off your car and get a roommate, everything will be fine. Especially since a lot of them aren't even making that much. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Some of them will be able to do that. Some of them
very few
won't make sense. Because again, okay, tell that to the woman in her 40s that has the 3 kids, single parent, or could be, man in his 40s with the 3 kids, but a single parent, 3 kids, that's what they're making. And you're like, okay, add a roommate plus your 3 kids and just pay this car off. Like,
it doesn't,
I don't know.
It does, but that's my point is it's not a universe.
It doesn't track easily.
No, it's not a universal answer, but it's always going to come back to their sort of libertarian, conservative universal answer, which is just take personal responsibility and everything will be fine. It's like, well, a lot of these people are. They're working their asses off and they're not getting paid enough. That's the point. That's the whole point of this. Because if wages were fair or high enough, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. These numbers would not come out this way. Half of Americans would not be below the living wage. That's the point.
Or if getting a higher level skill set that could allow you to earn more didn't put you in crippling debt so that you're going, do I want to run this risk to get myself to that place? Because these jobs don't pay a wage that I can actually function with.
Absolutely.
But if I want to get a wage I'm going to be able to function off of, it looks like this college situation in my town is going to set me back this amount in debt, and I have to run the gamble that I'm going to be able to do that and actually land this job that's going to get the higher wage.
Well,
right? People are scared of taking that gamble.
Right. But that's the thing is, what the guy is illustrating, we haven't even looked at the TikTok clip, but that's what he's illustrating, is there's a systemic issue here. And what we did was we just put one more thing on the pile just to show that, look, these guys are claiming to be financial experts, George and Ken. They're giving out financial advice, right? And they don't even understand that they're not looking at an individual budget. They're looking at a national average. They're looking at something that's done every year by major universities and compiled by MIT, that governments and corporations pay for to have done. This is universally accepted in the United States. They don't understand that that's what we're talking about. That's what's so funny is we were just making the joke that they didn't even understand that. They didn't understand it's an average. They think it's an actual physical budget on one individual. And that's what they do in the clip. And that's why it was funny. And since we try to keep those clips down to 10, 15 minutes, we couldn't get into all this shit the first time. We wanted to, but we didn't have time. But that's the point, is they don't get that. But Phil's already shown that he's somewhere else entirely. Right? Because he's thinking about, well, gee, if you're making 50 grand, you're living like a king. When in fact, in the United States, on average in the United States, you're just barely getting by. That's the point. They're going to disagree with that, and that's fine, but they don't even understand what it is, which is what's funny about it to me. Half of all Americans, and that's all age groups, make 52 or less. That's why he picked 25. But they don't get that because they're not finance people.
Let's keep going. I just spent some time looking at some monthly averages of regular costs of living all across the U.S., average costs. I put them all in a spreadsheet.
Okay, I want to point a finger on that because this comes up again. Listen to what the TikTok guy says again. But they don't get that because they're not finance people.
Let's keep going. I just spent some time looking at some monthly averages of regular costs of living all across the U.S., average costs.
Average cost. He said it twice. You heard it, Lace, right?
Yeah.
Average cost. That's our joke. The guy even tells them it's average.
Right.
But they think he's talking about his budget. He even tells them.
I'm all in a spreadsheet, did all the math for you so you can see exactly what this big picture is here. So these are just normal expenses that most single consumers have, and this is all.
Okay, so let's look at this real quick. So just basic expenses. So he's got rent, $1,659. That's average rent in the United States. Groceries, $500. Electric, water, his vehicle stuff, cell phone, internet, streaming, trash. You notice what he doesn't have in there, Lacey?
No.
Medical.
Most jobs that I can think of that would pay $50,000 a year, they probably have some kind of medical benefits, and I imagine that's why he wouldn't have that line item in his budget, because he gets like some kind of benefit from his job, is what I'm assuming.
Wrong. So first off, that's what he says. Average. We're looking at averages. He talks about medical. That's the problem, is they want it to be a budget that specifically applies to them, that they can universally apply out. Because then their philosophy about just take personal responsibility and it solves everything, they don't have to look at the systemic issue.
Let's go back and say again, we're not just talking about just a person with a $50,000 income. We're talking about the $50,000 and less.
Even less.
Because we're going back to the whole median thing,
mm-hmm.
right? And having to recognize that is the middle point,
right?
And there's a whole bunch below it. That there's 50% is there and lower. So probably Phil has a valid point in that a person that's at that 50 mark is probably working the kind of job that is coming with a health insurance benefit. Although you do have
he's
to
actually
figure in
wrong.
co-pays and things like that.
He's actually wrong. He's actually wrong
even,
about. He's wrong about that.
Okay.
I'm going to show you in a second.
Even so, though, like I am not paying extra per month for my medical, but I do have.
But you're a civil servant.
Co-pays, yes. But even that being said, while I don't put a line item in my budget for it necessarily, there are still things I do have to pay for. There are certain like co-pays and whatnot.
Right.
So to say that it's literally free and that there's literally a zero for that number still isn't true, even for a civil servant.
Right. But even for as a civil servant, it's actually even better. You're better off than people in the private sector. And
what I was also going to say about it, though, even though I know you're going to go back on this insurance thing, I was going to offer that at the $50,000 a year, I'd say the odds are good you're working a job that gives you insurance. But given how many people are below that, if you're making 25,
they're not getting that. So not half.
Probably not.
So even the 50,000 people, I'm going to show you, not only about half of them might get insurance, and even then they're paying for it.
And probably that percentage is probably, and I don't know the numbers, but the percentage is probably going to vary greatly when you say somebody making $25,000 a year.
Actually, it's more dependent on the size of the company you work for. But I just want to throw, so roughly, I went to Money Geek, roughly 30 million Americans. Let me show you this real quick. 30 million Americans of all ages, so 9.2% of the population, 2021, had no health insurance. That number is going to go up here too when they rescind some of the Medicaid expansion from that they'd done through COVID. So that's going to shoot up this year. So even more than 30 million is going to go up quite a bit. So that's just total Americans without health insurance. It did go down quite a bit under Obama with the ACA. And then they do uninsured by state. Now, what percentage of firms offer health benefits? Well, let's do this. So this is the big graph. Let me see if I can even I always screw this thing up. If I can. Can we see that large enough? Is that?
No.
Let me just I'll just zoom. We'll close you out. All right. That's better. Does that look a little bit better?
Yeah, a little better. It's still a little hard to see.
I'll show you. I'll just read it for you. So this top light blue line yo-yos between 97 and 99% of firms. And these are firms with 200 or more workers. So almost all of them have health benefits, offer health benefits if you have 200 or more employees. Okay. Firms between 10 and 200 employees, yo-yos was about in the 80s. Now it's around more like this high 60s, low 70s. Okay. The yellow line is the average of all of them. And the blue line here is firms with 3 to 9 workers, which a lot of these lower paid people work for smaller companies like that. And those only have about 49%. Okay. So really, I mean, in an ideal world, it's only about half, maybe a little bit more than half, depending on where you work, that of workers, total workers, not just, hang on, what's going on here? Back here. So the other thing about insurance is this chart here. This is what employers who offer insurance pay versus what their employees pay. Now, if you're like Lacey and you're a civil servant, you work for a government or something like that, typically they'll pay all of it, but most private firms don't. Very, very few, right? So the average that they figured here in 2021 it's about $7,700 annually for self-premium for one person, and that person's paying around $1,300 of that every year. Their employer's paying the other $6,400. For a family, right, the average is about $22,000 a year, and you're paying about $6,000 annually. So that's almost $500 a month, right? This is a little over, whatever, 110 or something. So in the guy's hypothetical budget, typically that would be taken out of your income on your check, but he's assuming you're getting all of your check. So medical has not been accounted for at all in this. So even if the person has medical, in this scenario, we're saying it's not even a necessity that they have medical insurance. That's the big thing they all miss, right? Or at least he misses. He has no medical.
He also doesn't have like credit cards or student loans or anything like that, which is pretty prevalent for most people.
And you know what else he doesn't?
Right, yeah. Student loans and credit card debt are totally prevalent. It's not necessary. You don't have to go into credit card debts, or, I even see vehicle payments on here, so you don't have to take out a loan to pay for your car. You can just drive a car that you can afford with cash.
See, this is all ridiculous too. This is the date.
Okay. So, let me jump in here. Well, we never said that they were necessary. We said they weren't represented on that budget, and that budget, yes, only was the necessities. However, if you're trying to get yourself to a better financial place and you are, like the majority of Americans, having those debts, you do need to deal with and pay for those debts.
Mm-hmm.
And even minimum payments for those things are not represented in this budget. That's the point.
Well, and then there's
super simple point at that.
Well, that's the other thing is, let's say you're making $25 an hour, right? And that's the average income, or the average living wage, where you live. So you're kind of scraping by, and oh my God, you get ill and you can't work for 3 to 6 months. It's not like you have savings in that budget either.
Or your car has some sort of super expensive issue and you need to fix it so you can freaking get to work.
You're getting a credit debt.
Yeah.
Now,
or maybe you're placed, but you don't have much of an emergency savings, and you have this huge plumbing issue, and you kind of need a running toilet.
Yeah.
So suddenly you're thousands of dollars set back, and it went on a freaking credit card. Mm-hmm. You have to deal with that, and it has to end up in your budget.
Yeah, shit happens.
Are we saying those are necessities? No, but are we saying they're the reality of probably the average American's budget has these payments in there?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well,
and TikToker did a perfectly commendable job as far as I'm concerned, but just pointing out the things that were not represented in that budget. It's not like this guy was trying to point out a budget that's got all sorts of craziness going on in it. There's actually things not even in there.
Yeah.
And the person's still not making it in that TikToker's scenario, which is part of the point.
Right, which is part of the whole point of this. So the other thing about it, too, is we just sit there and say, well, credit and college debt aren't necessary. Well, if you want to be a nurse or a teacher, or you want to be you want to have a lot of jobs anymore, 75% of new jobs, we've gone over that, require some sort of college. And most kids can't just afford to pay for it. They got to take out debt. And so if you want to get one of those jobs where you have a chance to make more money later in life, yeah, you have to take that risk. And the other thing is, okay, you've graduated from college and now you've got a job. Well, now you probably have to move. And if you don't have the money, you're taking out some credit debt to do it. I mean, this is just the reality for a lot of people. And just to dismiss it and say, well, you don't need it. Well, then you can't take that job. Right? If you have to move or do something, if your car breaks down, I guess you're walking to work 10 miles a day, whatever it is. It's like, that's not feasible. Right. There's also nothing in the budget for clothing or anything else. I mean, this is like bare. I mean, it's pretty bare bones. He'll disagree with us, trust me, but
if you can't afford a car with cash, then save up for it and take the bus.
Yeah, but how are you going to save up if you have no savings in your budget? That doesn't make any sense.
If he did that, look at the fuel. So he would be actually saving like around $700, $730 minus whatever it takes to take the bus instead or walk. When I worked at Carlos Jr. in San Diego, I would just walk to work.
You know what else he doesn't have?
Okay, so let's go into this real quick because we'll get more into the car shit in a little bit. Once again, he's talking about it like it's this guy. This guy has made it clear it's an average of Americans. So we're talking about this 90 to 100 million people. Okay, living without a car is not necessarily feasible. That's why it's factored in, and this is why. So even MIT factors this in. The car is a necessity for most Americans to work. Not all, but most. And this is why. So when we go ahead,
the town I grew up in is a perfect example. I grew up in a town in the Midwest, and it was one of the bigger towns in the state, and it did have city buses. There were 4 bus routes, and they did a pretty good job of covering the 4 quadrants of the city. But those buses basically stopped by 4 or 5 o'clock, like the end of the school day. Basically, a lot of people's kids took those city buses to get to their schools and home from their schools, etc. If you were reliant on those buses for your employment, I wouldn't say impossible, but it would have been a real struggle.
Well, right.
Real struggle.
So let's look at this. So this is Pew Research, and they're looking at people that work in urban, suburban areas versus rural. Okay. So rural areas, it's about 14% of the population. So about 46,500,000 people live in rural areas. According to census.gov, about 59.2% of those people are working. So about 27.5 million workers in rural areas. Now, oftentimes in rural areas, you don't have transit. So you almost have to have a car, right?
I was in a unique situation in this particular, town in the Midwest that we had any buses at all. We were the minority that had buses. Most of the other towns in that state did not have those systems at all.
Yeah, the town I went to junior high in was a farm town. There's no public transit. You had to walk or ride your bike everywhere, and it took forever.
Right.
Because that town was spread out as a farm town. Anyway, Americans live in urban, suburban areas, okay, are about 86% of the population. So about 285, almost 86 million people live in and around cities, okay? And 64.2% of those people are working, so about 183.5 million people work in urban, suburban areas. Now, to understand this, if a lot of people live in the suburbs because it's a little bit cheaper, or they live in towns outside the city because it's cheaper, and they drive and commute to work, right? Which means they're in traffic a lot, their gas bill's higher, they have to pay for parking and all that stuff. But a lot of people can't survive without a car, especially if you have kids, because you got to drive your kids to daycare or school or whatever it is, right? It makes it incredibly difficult. And if you're trying to take a bus on what would normally be a 20-minute drive, it could take you an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on your transit system. So now you're looking at commuting an extra 3 to 4 hours a day. That's 15 to 20 hours a week. That's like you're spending a part-time job on the bus, just trying to get home and to work. I mean, so yeah, when they factor this in, they're factoring in as it's a necessity for a lot of Americans. On top of that fact, I think 90% of Americans actually drive, commute. Some of that's by choice and some of it isn't, but just to dismiss all this, like, well, you don't have to have it, or this guy doesn't have to have it. It doesn't mean that when we're talking about 90 to 100 million people, that applies, and it doesn't to the vast majority. And that's the big problem, is that, once again, they think we're talking about one guy. They don't think we're talking about 90 to 100 million people. And it's worse for most of those people than this scenario the guy's given. But that was the initial gag, but you see how Phil fell right into it, just like they did.
Right. And this TikToker is representing that literal median number.
The high.
We have to realize, that literal median number, when you have to realize that the 50% of the population is at or below that number. So it's a very slim number of people who are at that number. Right.
Maybe 5 or 10 million at most. discretionary money. He has no fun money.
That is a good point. I actually love this. I love the idea of putting discretionary money as an actual line item in your budget. Maybe on a whim you want to take your girlfriend or your wife out to like an expensive sushi restaurant or something. It's a great idea to have a line item in the budget to know how much money you can spend on whatever the heck you want.
This is all just basic survival without medical care or any debt.
This budget is not basic survival. Rent is basic.
Okay. But it is according to MIT. Right? Now, we didn't bring that up, so he doesn't know that, so I'm not going to knock him for not knowing that. But the bottom line is, we just covered why. This is the basic things you need to be able to work and live. Basic survival in the U.S. Right? Now, if you want to get down to basic survival, Rambo in the woods, yeah, you're right. This is not basic survival. If you want to get to, do you want to have a job and a place to stay and food in the United States on average? Yeah, this is basic. It depends on where you want to draw that line. If you want to get to whatever, that's fine. But what we're talking about is have somebody who can work and survive in the U.S. That's it. Nothing else for them, just the ability to do those two things. So yeah, it's a survival budget on that sense. If you want to talk about the guy in Botswana, we can. Yeah, he's probably doing more basic survival, but he's probably lost kids to fucking pneumonia, which doesn't happen here that often. Lose his wife in childbirth or something.
Survival. Groceries, yeah. Electric, yeah. Water, of course. Vehicle payments, not basic survival. I agree that transportation is basic survival, but basic survival does not mean buying a car you can't afford, taking out a loan to drive a car that's just too expensive for you at this moment in time. Yeah, Jack.
But but if you don't get the job. You can't do the job. That's the thing. I mean, once again, he's talking about himself or this guy. He's not thinking about 90 to 100 million people, which is what
sure. And in all fairness, I'm so not into the auto loan thing. I've never owned a car. I've never had an auto loan, and I don't like them. So I'll put myself out there as one of those. But I recognize I primarily lived in cities where I could buy a mass transit pass on a monthly basis and get to and from pretty much wherever I needed to using that. And that's not necessarily the scenario for everybody.
No.
And a lot of people really had to get a loan in order to get themselves started on a car situation. I mean, maybe when you get a follow-up car, maybe you can position yourself to where that's a cash car, and I think that's fabulous. But we're also not talking about one human being here. We're talking about a whole lot of them.
Right. Well, like when I started out my first time as a financial advisor, right? And you're trying to get clients, which means you're going around and you're doing a ton of seminars. You're meeting people. You're doing house calls. I had to buy a car. And you don't want to buy a cheap car or a piece of crap used car because, oh, yeah, trust me with your money. Well, I'm driving around in a freaking beat up jalopy, right? No, you got to buy a car that looks like you're doing okay. It looks like you know what you're doing. Otherwise, people don't trust you. It's Worthington's law. They assume you're poor.
I don't know. I'm not your average person, but I might trust you more if the car was crappy because I'm the person who'd be thinking, that guy's smart. He's putting his money somewhere that's not that car.
Well, tip for you guys, young financial advisors: buy something that's like middle of the road but nice, right? You buy you get the guy that leases the Mercedes, then your clients are going to think, what the fuck is he doing with my money that he's driving around in a Mercedes? As opposed to you cruising around in a Buick, they're like, okay, he's practical. I get it.
Right. They're like, it's a decent car. He's being practical. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go ahead and skip ahead a little bit because this is just more of this generic stuff. But he gets on with the car stuff, and we'll break this down because he makes another big mistake here. But once again, it's the joke initially. I want to go back to say this. So the joke initially was George and Ken are on the show peddling financial advice, peddling their books and their financial products for Ramsey, right? They're giving financial advice to people, and yet you get a simple scenario of an average minimum need, budget need, right? And they don't even know what that is. They think we're talking about an individual person, not an average across the country, even though the guy said it 3 times in the TikTok video. This is an average. It's a rough average. So it cracks me up. But Phil falls into the same trap. And part of it is because they don't want to address the systemic issue, which is what the guy is trying to do. But we'll jump in here, right around, where is it? Right here.
Right.
Gas, maintenance, tires. So let's say go ahead, you were saying?
It feels like there are 2 completely separate things that are being addressed here.
Mm-hmm.
Phil and the folks at Ramsey Network are trying to address literal individuals with this literal budget, and the TikTokers seem to be trying to address what is a larger mass scale problem with a mass scale of people that are into these sort of budget categories, income categories, etc.
Right. But that was,
again, it's like an apple and orange thing.
But yeah, but when we did this, we didn't want to, we're getting in the weeds now. A lot of this shit we couldn't cover. And we did talk about, I remember we talked about that after the video. We were like, man, we could have talked about this and this and this. And, but once again, those videos they're short. They're the end of the show. And mostly that's just our dessert. It's just us being able to criticize people we know don't have a clue what they're talking about. Right? That's basically, we finished our peas, now we want our chocolate cake. That's basically what that video was.
I was like, all right, we ate the peas. Can I have the chocolate lava cake now?
Yeah, please, Mom. So that's all that was. We're just trying to point out these guys are claiming to be financial experts, and they don't even understand simple finance things that they're looking at. That was all we were pointing out. And they missed the whole point that this is addressing a big systemic issue, and their solution to it was get a roommate, get rid of your car, or pay off your car. And they never really tell you how to do any of that. They're just, just do it, right? But that doesn't solve the national problem, right? You're going to tell 90 million people, just get a roommate, and boom, poverty will end. Done. Right? That was our joke, because they don't understand what they're talking about.
Right. Tell that to my friend that's a single parent of 2 in the New York City area with a 2-bedroom apartment only. Tell her, all you need to do is get rid of your vehicle and get a roommate. Well, she's kind of on the outskirts, and if she's trying to commute without her vehicle in and out of work, and she's on the outskirts because she's a single parent that,
Oh, yeah, she's commuting 20 plus hours a week.
And needs more bedroom space because she's got kids, right? So she's actually one of the people, even though she's in a large city, actually needs her car. So tell her to get rid of her car and get a roommate. Where's she going to put where's the roommate going to go?
And when is she ever going to see her kids? She's going to be commuting all the time.
She's gonna double her commute and add a roommate. Where is she going to be bunking in with her kids?
Yeah, like I said, it's just I don't think Phil intends it to be mean or whatnot, but it's really heartless when you think about it for 2 minutes. What he's saying, right? And what George and Ken are saying, it is really heartless. George and Ken should know better, but they don't care because that's how they make their money, right? That's why we make fun of them. I don't think Phil understands it, but he thinks, and I think he's trying to be positive and like, look, if you're just responsible and you're smart and do stuff, I think that's what he thinks he's doing. But what he's basically saying is, like I said, it's basically walking into the homeless shelter and telling them, be grateful you live in America, to somebody who's starving. Doesn't help solve the problem. And it's kind of dickish. Especially for somebody who's doing okay. You know what I'm saying? Used car, it's half that, so that's still $400 a month.
I drive a used vehicle.
Okay, let's go back to this real quick. I wanted to
driving cars. They can't afford it.
So that's about $805. Why did I lose it? The average cost to operate a new car. Okay, let me in the United States is about $9,666.
I'm gonna stop you there. That doesn't matter. If buying a new car is detrimental to your net worth, you shouldn't buy it. The
Well,
cost to operate a new car,
let me skip. Okay. He didn't understand. So
whether you should or should not actually seems like it's beside the point.
it wasn't the point. Yeah.
The point is that these are the scenarios that people are already in,
Mm-hmm.
and people are doing this behavior. We're not addressing whether they should or should not do this behavior.
No.
They are buying these vehicles. This is how much it's costing them. And this TikToker's video that was being responded to has a number in there that is actually significantly under those average numbers.
Yeah, it's way less. He's doing the 400 was the average he came up with, right? Mm-hmm. That's why I said 400. I'm going with his, but I was arguing maybe his average might even be a little low. And so what we did was we went to, and we didn't get into this in the video, I just quoted it, but we went to this. This was just bank rate, and they took a study here from AAA. Okay. And it said drivers put an average of $9,600 toward their car right here. Average cost to operate a new car 2021 was $9,600, $66. Okay. Full covered insurance amounts and that. They didn't add all of it together. But my point being was that's for a new car. New cars are easy to track. Used cars, it's hard to track how much people spend on them. With new cars, it's pretty easy because they have warranties and they're usually going back to the dealership. So it's pretty easy to track that. So we're saying this is $9,666. This is a gauge. This is what it is. I didn't say buy a new car, which is immediately where he went. I'm saying this is where we're gauging. The new car is going to cost you about $800 a month. Not for payments, just to maintain it. Right? Everything else, license, registration, all that. That's all we're talking about. So he like, again, he misses the point and he's wrong about what we're talking about. He's making all these assumptions and he doesn't really even understand the question, which is which is the same thing we were making fun of George and Ken for. I'm not dogging Phil because he probably doesn't understand any of this. And he's a young guy. He does not a finance person like we are, but neither George and Ken. So we'll get into that in a minute too. So let's say for a used car, it's half that. So that's still $400 a month.
I drive a used vehicle, this van, and it's not $400 a month. So $800 a month to operate a new car. Okay, cool. Don't operate a new car unless you can afford to. Operating a used car costs $400 a month.
Once again, we're not talking about you. We're not talking about individual. We're talking averages. He's still stuck on, we're talking about an individual person. We're talking averages. Okay? And we already determined that most people need a car for work. So this is what the average thing the guy is doing. That's all it is. It's already baked into the cake. You want to argue and tell 90 million Americans just don't buy a car or whatever, that's fine. But it doesn't solve anything. You're arguing against the wind.
Seen that in my own personal experience, but I'll let you continue.
Even if you owe nothing on the car, just to operate the car is going to cost you that. But on a used car, it's probably going to cost you more, especially a cheap car, because you're going to have more maintenance problems.
So it may not be in your monthly payment, but it's still going to be an expense that comes up regularly.
There are hidden costs with owning a car.
You're still looking at somewhere between $600 to $900 a month just to operate a used car in any given month. And that's license, registration, insurance, parking, all that shit, right? So just getting rid of the car payment doesn't solve a fuck ton here.
It does. I mean, by your own logic, I don't agree that it costs that much to operate a used car. You just said $600 to $900 to operate a used car. I'm going to rewind it to make sure you said that.
Still looking at somewhere between $600 to $900 a month. So just getting rid of the car payment doesn't solve a fuck ton here.
Yeah, $600 to $900 to operate a used car. No. That's just all right.
Actually, yeah, on average, that's about right. We just looked at the average for new cars. Because what he's not thinking about is, well, wait, because he's living out in the sticks. What he's not thinking about is, do you live in a city? Do you live in the suburbs? Are you renting? Well, if you're making less than $50,000 a year, you're probably renting. You have a car? I'll tell you what, most rental properties in the suburbs or the city, they'll make you pay for parking as an additional cost. They don't just give you a parking spot with the apartment. And that could be another $100 and $150 a month. You need to park to go to work and pay for parking downtown. You're paying at least another, $250 to $500 a month for parking downtown. Plus, you're going to get tickets, stuff like that. Plus, already there, we're looking at, let's say, $250 plus that. So that's $400 right there a month just in parking, plus gas, plus maintenance, right? Now, let's say I have to replace the tires on my car and it costs $600, $150 a tire, right? Well, that was $600 that month, but if you divide it out through the year, that was an extra $50 a month. So now we're adding all these things on top. Yeah, you'll get to $600 to $900 real quick for a lot of people. Now, if I'm living out in the sticks and I barely drive my car, yeah, I'm probably not spending more than $100 or $200 a month.
Well, and a lot of these smaller places don't have the pay for parking situation, with maybe some few minor exceptions near downtown business districts or whatever.
Right.
But they're not doing the pay for parking scenario. But if you're talking about people in major cities,
suburbs,
there are lots of scenarios where if you're around a major city somehow, you're going to have to pay for parking, and it's not just small little feeding a meter situations. They're really expensive.
Yeah, and then you factor if you're commuting to work from the suburbs to the city, you're in traffic a lot, so you're spending a lot more on gas. Some cities if you have to go over a bridge, you have to pay a toll. That costs money every day, both ways.
People that work with me, I work in the city, but I know people who live in New Jersey because it's less expensive in New Jersey, to live, and you can get more space, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But they're paying $20 just to go over a flipping bridge here, man. Yeah, I mean, like the tolls are really
they eat away. And that's the other thing is, again, this is an average. This is not just some guy somewhere. This is an average.
It's $400 a month in them going over the bridge to get to work.
Right. So there are people that are paying $1,500, $1,600 a month just to gas, maintenance, tolls, parking, all that shit. Well, if you average them with Phil, who's paying whatever $200 a month for his van, like he said, well, $1,600 plus 2, that's 18. Divide that by 2. The average is $900 a month between the two of them. And that's what we're looking at, is an average. That's why I wanted to clarify that at the beginning, medians versus average. This is an average. He doesn't understand. He's not thinking about what is it like for a guy in Florida, in Miami, versus Tampa. In Miami, you are paying a shit ton to have that car. Just for parking and stuff. I've been to Miami. In Tampa Bay, or in Tampa, Florida, right? You're paying nothing, man. I mean, you're just paying gas and maintenance and whatever. You're not paying any of that other shit. That's the thing he doesn't understand. Once again, I'm not saying he's stupid or anything. I just don't think he understands any of this stuff. And he's made the same mistake George and Ken have, which is we're not talking about one guy and one specific situation. We're talking about a general thing. And they're trying to argue a specific case to the general, and we're arguing the general to more specific problems, which is the more logical way to do that. We're using deduction, they're using induction. That's the difference. But yeah, so that's kind of the whole problem with the argument that I'm trying to say. He's making the same mistake George encounters. One is they don't understand the question, first of all. Second off, they're trying to argue specifically one thing and apply it to like a general populace. When what we're talking about is the actual average of the general populace, their thing doesn't apply. Right? It's once again me arguing I'm 6 foot tall, so I assume all people must be 6 foot tall. I can't reasonably do that because the evidence is already no, that's not the case. Right? So they don't know the evidence, they don't understand it, and they're not looking at it. The other thing about it is I want to get into this a little bit because when we started the show, we had a discussion about shows that we watched, finance shows, where people were demonstrably wrong. And we knew it, and it was frustrating. And so we wanted to do bits, and that's what this bit is, where we point out, look at these people, they're demonstrably wrong. When we started doing it, we didn't realize the rabbit hole we were falling down. So just to give you an example, there's a lot of back dealing that goes on with some of these guys. But the thing is we'll just look at the Dave Ramsey crew and the two guys here, George Kamel and Ken Coleman, right? So let me set up this video real quick, and then we'll go to... Anyway, but so George Kamel is, I don't know what his education is or where he worked before Dave Ramsey. He doesn't say. He doesn't publish it anywhere. He doesn't talk about it. I can't find anybody who knows much about him. So we don't know what his background is. Right? But I know he's never been licensed as a broker. He's never been licensed as an insurance agent. So he's never worked with clients. He's never been licensed as a financial advisor. So he's never done any of that. So the guy's never worked with clients. We don't know that he's had any background in finance, in education, or training. Ken Coleman went to Trinity College. I can't remember what he majored in, but it wasn't finance. He dropped out of Trinity College and went into broadcasting. And good for him. He's on the Ramsey Show now, which is what he wanted. But he's on the Ramsey Show, and he's their employment expert. But he has no background in employment law or business hiring or recruiting or anything like that, professionally or educationally. Right? Now, just because somebody is certified doesn't make them right. But it gives you a little bit more credibility. Like if my lawyer says, hey, take the plea, and then I run into some guy at the bar who says, no, your lawyer's an idiot. I was charged with the same thing, and I went to trial and won. Go to trial. Who would you rather listen to? Your lawyer who went to law school and passed the bar and has done this professionally, or some guy you met at the bar? That's the difference. You know, both Lacey and I have been working as financial professionals for years. We work with clients. We have clients currently, which is why we can't do a ton of videos a week. We have our jobs, right? Lacey also works as a teacher, but I work full time doing this, right? We have educations and backgrounds. Lacey does certified to do taxes. I'm certified as a financial advisor. I have a master's degree in finance. I mean, I have an executive certificate. We do this for a living. So when we see this, we laugh at it. But the funny thing about it is that's the joke here. Now, the other thing I want to compare is you have Ken and George giving financial advice. You know what we never do on this show? Give financial advice.
Give financial advice.
Because we know better, because we're professionals. We know better than to give financial advice without knowing all the facts. We could ruin our careers. That's the difference. There's stakes for us. That's why the other thing you notice is when we do these episodes and these shows, what do? We provide a shit ton of evidence. We provide articles. We provide data. And in these fun clips we don't usually. We'll say the data, but we won't show it to you necessarily. But that's the deal, is Phil has bought into their shtick. Why? Because it's easy. It's simple. Just be responsible and everything will work out. There's no complication or nuance to life. But that's the whole gag. So now we get to the point where he gets a little frustrated with me on this one, and I think you're going to like this part. Well, we're talking about two idiots that fell back asswards into their BS jobs, where they're not qualified at all to be giving advice on any of this stuff. They have no educational background. They have no experience in these fields.
Okay, like I said before, I only watched like 10 minutes into this video before starting this. I've got to rewind it and listen to that again.
We're talking about two idiots that fell back asswards into their BS jobs, where they're not qualified at all to be giving advice on any of this stuff. They have no educational background. They have no experience in these fields.
I've got to admit, I don't know if Ken Coleman and George Kamel are qualified or not. I really don't. But what does it mean to be qualified?
No, Lacey, what does it mean to be qualified?
Well, generally speaking,
It means you're certified.
when you read a job description, even, there's a section that says job qualifications.
But what does that even
And
mean?
usually what they're listing are previous work-related experiences that you have had that are applicable to said position.
Or education,
right?
or yep.
So that is the loosest sense of the term. In a much more specific, strict sense, it would be certifications, degrees,
Yeah, that kind of jazz.
or previous job positions that are in an obvious way equivalent or relatable.
Right.
Like that's what qualifications are. So I have seen a brain. I am not qualified to perform brain surgery.
Right.
So me seeing a brain does not make me qualified to perform brain
brain
surgery.
So is that, yeah, God. So once again, that's the difference. Is we actually have qualifications to do our jobs, but you notice we're not doing them on air because that would be irresponsible. We're commenting on things, we're looking at things, and we're breaking down the concepts so you understand them, and we want you to understand them. And the concepts here were simple. That's a living wage. We're talking about averages, but nobody gets that, right? And I know this is meta, but that was why I wanted to do this, because it's so ironic. Is we're commenting on two guys who don't understand what they're looking at, and then this guy comments on us and criticizes us because he doesn't understand what they're looking at. And now we're having to explain it again in more detail that you don't understand what you're looking at. So it's one of those things where I kind of yo-yo back between, are we doing a bad job, or is this just a certain segment that we're just never going to reach?
I'm not going to lie, I kind of hope that TikToker has gotten a lot
of views.
Extra views now that, I mean, we're small, and I'm gonna say Phil's small compared to the Ramsey Network, but the Ramsey Network is not a thing, and then we did a thing on their thing, and he's done a thing on us doing a thing on their thing. So I'm kind of just hoping this TikToker gets like a lot of credit for this.
He deserves it, man. He stirred up a shitstorm, and all he was doing was explaining a living wage.
Right. I mean, that's funny, right? And I kind of want to pat him on the back and say, and I hope you got a lot of views. Good job.
All right, well, we'll do this last little bit and we'll wrap up here. But
all right.
This is Phil talking about. So we were our end thought process was, look, the issue is people aren't getting paid enough, right? So as an individual, all you can really do is you can go out and vote, you can unionize, you can be more proactive, you can push for things like raising the minimum wage, stuff like that. We were just sort of wrapping up the thought process, and that's all we were doing here.
When we're addressing what we feel the original TikToker was sort of trying to
was what he was
highlight,
saying,
which it was more large, broad, systemic types of issues
that people aren't getting paid enough.
We were kind of looping back to those.
Yeah, that's all it was. But we were still stuck on, we were talking about averages, right? We were talking about the big picture. They were talking about like it was a specific budget, and that's why we're wrapping up this way. But see, Phil's still stuck on it's one guy we're talking about, and it's not. And their jobs and trying to unionize, yeah, that's how you do it.
No, what? Where did that come from? Well, okay, here's my opinion on the unionization stuff. If you don't like working for somebody, don't work for them. You're not a slave. You're not being forced to work that job. I worked a job up in Alaska.
We'll skip his anecdote. But here's the thing. If you have a lot of situations, you have a lot of debt, you have 2 kids or something like that, right? Your spouse is sick and you're the only one working, you can't really afford to quit your job. Right?
Right. Well, and you know what? It's also not as simple as just go and get a different job, because I belong to a teachers union, one of the largest unions in the country, actually.
Mhm.
And to say, if you don't like those job conditions, just go get a different job. Well, I also work for one of the largest school districts in the country, so telling me just to go get another job, you're telling me I either can't work in the public school system
Mhm.
or I'm supposed to move?
Right. Well, then,
You know,
but then here he's
so
gonna.
that's not always practical.
No, it's not. But he's gonna double down a little bit here.
They just put her in charge. But after that happened, I was like, I'm done. And I literally quit. No 2-week notice or anything. I quit, hopped in my car, and drove.
Most people can't do that, though. Most people can't do
That's
that.
That's a pretty entitled suggestion.
No, I know, but we're talking about a single guy with no kids, no responsibilities.
I mean,
it's pretty.
A lot of single people without children
I
don't
agree.
have the luxury to even be able to just like.
Well, they don't have the money.
No 2-week notice. They, don't have. And I'm all about build that emergency fund so that you could do that. But a lot of people are just not in that situation, even though single.
No. All right, let's wrap up.
Like, oh, we want you back, Phil. Come on. But no, I don't tolerate abuse, whether that be emotionally or physically. It was only verbal abuse that I was suffering at that job. But I wouldn't tolerate it, And I did give them a chance. And losers and
there it was.
Unionize because losers unionize because losers want to find a bunch of other losers and basically talk to their employer and be like, we will work for you. Dude, this is the guy who gave you a job. Don't work for them. All right? Don't work.
Losers unionize.
Well,
oh, man.
I really hope a lot of people from my union just saw that. And
once again, this is what, like the 7th or 8th time in this video he's been just flat wrong. So losers unionize. Well, union workers get higher pay if they can join the union. And this is Reuters saying this, right? And so they talked about this. 2 decades of wage for retail workers found that pay advantage union workers have enjoyed over non-union employees in that sector is increasing. The weekly pay differential between a union and non-union worker widened from $20 in 2013 to more than $50 in 2019. Plus, union workers are more likely to have healthcare benefits. Right. The other last thing I want to just hit on real quick is the when they do this whole thing about, it's about you just have to sacrifice. It's about personal responsibility, and Phil's going to end with that, and I'm just going to skip it because it's a long-winded, Deepak Chopra, Tony Robbins kind of speech. And it's great if you want to check out Phil. Like I said, we don't have any problem with Phil. We think he's a nice guy and everything, but he's just wrong, and we just kind of wanted to point out because he brought up kind of as a lightning rod a lot of issues we've wanted to talk about for months. And that was, we thank him for that. We really thank him for doing this video because it opened up a big window for us. But the big sort of overall arching thing is there's a lot of conservative thought that permeates here. And the Dave Ramsey show is definitely one of them. I mean, they're tied in with Fox News and the Daily Wire and all these right-wing sites. And that's where they're pushing for their audience and stuff. But the big argument about all this stuff is that it's all about personal responsibility. If you just take control of your life, right, and you just make the smart choices, you'll be rich too, right? We've known for decades that is not the case. And I have one last thing to show you. So this is just one of fucking thousands of studies that have been done. But this is a Georgetown study, an article. And they found wealth, not ability, the biggest predictor of future success. Right? So they pointed out here, a big part of the so-called American dream promises that people work hard enough, no matter how poor they are, they'll find success. It turns out that's not completely true. Young people who are minorities or from working class or low income who are talented when they're young, they don't make it to the finish line. Carnival is the professor did it. They said the study goes all the way into the labor market, and in the end, the loss rate of these young people is huge. So they looked at a bunch of data and found that poor students are less likely to become wealthy by age 25 than not so smart rich students. And then they go on to explain. And the reason is because kids with money, people who grow up with money, have more advantages, more opportunities. You could be the smartest,
we've addressed this in several videos.
Yeah. But that's the point is, look, yeah, you have to take personal responsibility and make smart choices. Sure. We're not arguing against that. That's a given, right? The point is, though, is if you're starting out behind the 8 ball, it's a lot harder to succeed. You don't have the connections, you don't have the money, you don't have the resources, as opposed to a rich kid who's half your ability. So this idea that it's just all about personal responsibility is bullshit. There is a systemic issue, and that's what we're talking about when we were talking about this with the living wage situation, and they ignore it completely because to address it would blow up their entire philosophy. And I think that's when we started, where Phil starts out with, well, even in America, if you're poor, you're still living like a king, right? Because then with that, then I can dismiss that there's any systemic problem in the United States that needs to be addressed. And I can just, no, it's all just about personal choice, which allows you to ignore the bigger problems and ignore the fact that, half these people are below the living wage. Half of American workers, almost 100 million people. So, I mean, I appreciate Phil. I appreciate everything he did. It was great. I don't think he's a bad person or he hates poor people or anything. I think his heart's in the right place. I just think he didn't understand any of that. And I think that's the problem is it's easier to follow guys like Ken and George who don't even know what they're talking about because they just wrap it up in a nice little, if you just do X, Y, Z, it'll all be, tits and champagne, unicorns and rainbows. But
follow this formula and go.
Buy my miracle elixir and everything will work out fine. That's how they make their money. So I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add, but once again, appreciation to Phil Aram. Thank you so much. This was really eye-opening for me. Hope it was for you too. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I very much enjoyed it. I do think that he had the same sort of understanding that the folks at the Ramsey Network did. They were kind of looking at this as an individual person as opposed to recognizing this was more of a lens into a huge segment of population, not one specific individual. And it makes all the difference in the world in terms of what you would do with this sort of analysis, because it's not one person's budget we're just picking apart. But I appreciated the opportunity for us to sort of dig into some of those sort of subtopics that we've been interested in and haven't had the opportunity to really get into.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again, Phil. Where can everybody catch you, Lacey?
Well, as always, you can catch me on my site at mysensewithsense.com for blog posts or information about workshops or courses. If you want to write into me for further information about any of those, or if you want to write in with topic suggestions, if you've got any clips for us, or if you want to respond to our responses, then you can also email us. And where can they do that, Duncan?
Yeah, you can email us at gossipfinancead@outlook.com. It's going to be down below. Other than that, we'll catch you next time. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.